Just up there on the horizon, if I zoom in, is Stonehenge, and the hundreds of people that you see there today, probably thousands. If I was stood here at the time of construction of the megaliths, the big ones on the outside, right here, well, I wouldn't have been able to see the same view. It would have been obstructed by a huge fence, maybe 12 to 20 feet high. And what's even more intriguing about this story is it wasn't a circular feature around Stonehenge. This was a linear feature, one that stretched from far beyond the horizon down there, 2 kilometres past Stonehenge, down here alongside the avenue, to where it then veered off at an adjacent angle up toward the trees on the horizon through Stonehenge bottom. Welcome to the story of the really curious Stonehenge fence. Right, I'm going to draw you on this extremely accurate and to scale map. I'm going to draw you a line, but before I do, let's stick in Stonehenge. Okay, and we're also going to draw the avenue because that's quite important. So the avenue went from roughly here, headed east, down to Stonehenge bottom and up to there. And the line in question is going to be drawn in green. Yeah, from right down here, all the way up here, up past Stonehenge. Bit of a gap. Gaps are important, we'll come to that. And we carry on, then we've got another gap over 250, maybe 300 metres long. And when we get to Stonehenge bottom, we take a completely different direction to the avenue, which heads east. And our line is going to head directly north. There's our fence. So as I leave Stonehenge and walk down the avenue here, well, before we ask the really important questions of what it was for, well, what did this look like? So first of all, we have oak trees between 15 to 40 centimetres in diameter, all butted up against one another along this linear palisade. It was found in a V-shaped ditch, 1.4 metres deep, 2 metres across. Here is a useful sign. This is the point as well where the avenue would have veered off to the east and the palisade went off to the north through that valley up there, Stonehenge bottom, towards the trees in the distance. Well, it turns out, well, this doesn't tell us anything about the palisade whatsoever, this useful sign. However, what I will tell you is the palisade itself was contemporary with the Sarsens, the big megaliths that surround the structure that is Stonehenge. Let's go head off up the avenue for the moment and start asking some of these big questions. The year is 1967 and the underpass on the old road, the A344, is being constructed. This would allow for safe passage from the car park to the site. Now, during excavation of the underpass, this palisade was discovered. The ditch in its V shape, the depth and the width and the holes that the posts once stuck themselves in were there for all to see. So if, like me, when you first heard of this palisade, this fence, you may have thought it was a stock enclosure, and that's a sensible idea. Great minds think alike, I'm sure. But there's 2 problems. Number one, this was at least 12 foot high, depending on the models of how high you build a fence and how high the foot holding is. And number 2, this was a 2-kilometre linear fence. Not a complete straight line, but linear nonetheless. It wasn't a circle or square or whatever enclosure that would have sensibly held your stock. There are a few other theories that don't quite add up, some discounted by a paper by Fisher and Sims in 2012, such as a Bronze Age linear boundary, where that would imply habitation, dwellings, settlements here. And of course, why would you have the gap? So next up, let's have a look at the line of the palisade, especially in context of the avenue that makes its journey up here. If we look from above at both mapped out, well, it seems pretty clear that the palisade was to protect the view of Stonehenge. So here in the landscape, walking down the avenue, you can kind of get a feel for the random ceremonies that would have took place here. The high priests walking down the avenue, conducting their business, and the Palisade across the horizon in front of me, blocking the view from the north and the west, and of course the topography here blocking the view down to the Avon in the south. Really was a secluded avenue, at least at this point. So that's it, right? Job done. That was it, the view held in 2008, and I think the likes of Mike Pitts almost said the word that I've just repeated back to you just then, and I think he even suggested that the Palisade would have heightened the mystery of the ceremonies that went on here, and that all makes good sense, at least until we get into Stonehenge Bottom, when something doesn't quite add up. So this is Stonehenge Bottom. Now this is the point where the avenue and the Palisade converge or part, depending on which way you're facing. So I've come from the east along the avenue, and from the north the Palisade comes down here to meet it, where they then both head towards Stonehenge. And if we imagine a view from the west where we're trying to block out things, well, there's two problems with that theory. So number one, well, we're down here in Stonehenge Bottom. You need a 20 metre, let alone 12 foot or 20 foot fence. The view from up there on the west, you'll be able to see all across the landscape there and probably onto the avenue. That's not really blocking the view. And number two, do you remember those gaps that I drew in the Palisade, the fence? Well, there's one that's over 200 metres, maybe closer to 300, and there's one that's close to Stonehenge as well. Well, if you're blocking the view from that side, why have gaps in the Palisade? The mystery deepens. So with the next model, things start to get a bit interesting, because the previous model, stopping people from looking in from the west at our weird and wonderful ceremonies, well, what if we flip that on its head for this model, and what if we said it's to stop people looking out from the inside, us here doing our ceremonies looking that way? Because if we do accept that to be the case, we're blocking 170 degrees of the skyline. There's a couple of question marks, but it does seem a little bit more interesting. In a paper in 2012, Fisher and Sims suggest that this model has so many more positive considerations than the previous models. I'll try and explain as best I can, but to do that we're going to need to head to the far horizon to Robin Hood's Ball. Now you may be asking yourself, what exactly is Robin Hood's Ball? And that's a great question, because I didn't know before I started this too. Essentially it's that, not that. That there contained a 6,000-year-old Neolithic causewayed enclosure right here, Robin Hood's Ball. Now, we're around about 4 kilometres north-northeast of Stonehenge, and this was used for around 1,500 years, 3,000, 2,500 BC, coincidentally the same time as the first earthworks started at Stonehenge. So we have a possible link there. Now, if you're at Stonehenge and you look north-northeast, this is the exact spot on the horizon that you would see. You'd see Robin Hood's Ball stuck up there. So we do have a link. So let's step back to the avenue and keep in mind Robin Hood's Ball. If we climb the avenue from the Avon, as was likely intended, well, at the first bend of the avenue the ball would come into view, assuming a 12 to 15 foot high palisade. Then we continue to approach the second curve of the avenue where it meets the palisade. The view of Robin Hood's Ball is now obscured. According to Exxon in 2000, this was deliberate. It shielded the old world from the new, but then we have the gap as we enter Stonehenge itself. So if we are going to factor in Robin Hood's Ball up here on the top of the landscape as if viewed from Stonehenge, with this on and off blocking of the view via the palisade, well, then we do need to factor in one more thing. So I'll be the first to admit that when things get celestial, well, they get a tad confusing for me at least, but we do need to consider the sky. Mike Parker Pearson suggested that these monuments included astronomy in their design, and since horizons are the perceived point of convergence of the landscape to the skyscape, then we should consider this view. All that said, around 2500 BC, give or take, well, nothing celestial seems to align with Robin Hood's ball, certainly from the position of Stonehenge and the gap in the fence, the palisade, maybe allowing the view back to Robin Hood's ball. No moon or stars of perceived significance. If, however, we head back along the avenue to the point of its highest part before it goes down into Stonehenge bottom, well, then you can see Robin Hood's ball over the palisade, and there is a potential that the moon at that time would have lined up. It doesn't quite fit in terms of a unified theory in my head. Let's consider one more thing. Imagine you're trying to capture and kill an auroch, huge beast of the time. You fired your arrows into it, your flints, and of course it's going to take a time before it runs around the trees or runs around the open plain, scattering in a dangerous way. Well, imagine if you had a long linear palisade to help you corral that beast. Imagine if it had gaps in it, and imagine if one of those gaps was very close to Stonehenge, where you could make your peace to the gods and thank them for the gift that they'd given you. Well, that's one theory, and I'm not sure if it sits any worse or any better than the others we've discussed today, but perhaps the answer, as always, will be in archaeology telling us these answers one day in the future. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to learn about how the Stonehenge house just vanished, you can watch the video just here. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.